Welcome to the Alternative Dog Moms podcast. I'm Kimberly Gauthier, creator of Keep the Tail Wagging. I've been blogging about raw feeding, pet wellness, and life as a crazy dog mom for more than 10 years. I've seen massive improvements in my dog's health since I began raising my dogs naturally, and I'm passionate about sharing my experience to help other pet parents.
I'm Erin Scott from the Believe in Dog podcast. For more than 10 years, I've been researching and learning everything I can about healing cancer, allergies, autoimmune, and mystery illnesses in both my dogs and myself. And I can't wait to share with you everything I've learned in case it could help you too. As the Alternative Dog Moms, Kimberly and I are bringing you all the latest dog health news that we're following and the brilliant people we're meeting along the way. Now let's get started. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, Erin.
So I'm excited to talk to our guest today. We have Paula Vandervoort with us. Hi, Paula. How are you?
Hello, I am great. And I'm Paula with Gentry Boxers in the Dog Breeder Store.
Yeah, Kimberly and I are both from like the rescue and shelter community. And so I don't really know very much about breeding. And I'm so curious to dive into your story. Can you just tell us a little bit about how you got started doing what you do? And have you always been on the like natural end of the spectrum, the holistic side, or has that been a journey for you also?
My journey is very similar to both of your journeys. So, I've been an animal lover. I think, Erin, you said you were sort of forced into loving dogs, but then once you got there, you were like all in. But I was born loving animals. And when I was a little kid, I used to raise mice for my friends, and I loved watching them give birth and all that. So I wanted to be a veterinarian. I went to school for that. I went to university and my studies were in biology and reproductive physiology and so forth. But I started breeding when I was very young, in the early 70s. And I just happened to luck into buying a dog through the newspaper. That's all we had back then, I love boxers. And she happened to be a dog out of a pretty terrific pedigree. And I had some wonderful mentors that hammered into me how important it was to do this ethically and also to health screen any dog that I was thinking about breeding and to learn how to do it correctly. So I've always done that. I ended up going another direction because veterinarians back then made less than I was making as a cocktail waitress working my way through college.
Wow.
Yeah. So I just decided, but I'd always loved animals. And so I kept that side of my life going continuously. And I love breeding. I love just everything about it, but I don't breed very often. And I'm not a backyard breeder. And I have been involved in the rescue community for many decades. So when I was the president of the Sacramento Valley Boxer Club, we had a very large club there with 100 families in it, but we also had a very large rescue operation. So we took in any animal that even remotely looked like a boxer from the pound. And so we would rehabilitate them and so forth. And my last few years, when I got a little bit too old to do a lot of rescue myself, I was a volunteer for Friends for Life, which is our no-kill shelter here in Houston. And I was training puppies for adoption. So I very firmly believe in the rescue community. And I also very much support ethical dog breeding for the right reasons. And I was not in the natural holistic end of things up until probably, I would say maybe 5 or 6 generations ago with my breeding program. And the reason I got involved was because I had a dog that had a very severe reaction to a rabies vaccine. And I was doing everything the way I was taught to do it. I was feeding all the high-end kibble. I was, using all the antibiotics. I was doing all the vaccines when they were supposed to be given. And I thought I was being a good dog mom and a good breeder. And this is a dog that was my teacher. Her name was Ginger. And I firmly believe that dogs come into our lives to teach us things. And so Ginger was the one who opened my eyes to the fact that there were better ways to do things. And she did have a very severe and immediate reaction to a rabies vaccine that gave me the opportunity to learn a lot about the damage they can do and also what it takes to actually mitigate that kind of damage, but better yet, how to prevent it. Mm-hmm. So I've applied all of that to my breeding program. I ended up going to school for animal naturopathy, which is the science of using Mother Nature to support your animals. And I ran into my mentor there. Her name is Dr. Jeannie Thomason. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of her, but she was the founder of the Natural Rearing Breeder Association, and she ran the school I went to. So she was a poodle breeder and also a Boston Terrier breeder. And she wrote the book that we use as breeders, and it's called Natural Rearing. And so it's kind of our Bible. I have a very large library of natural medicine books, but, pretty much everything out there. I'm waiting to read your book, Kimberly. I don't have your book yet.
I got to get that to you.
Yeah, you do. You do. You got my address.
One thing that I want to know, there's so much terminology surrounding breeding and it's the things that people throw around, but I don't know if we all really understand the difference between like a reputable breeder, a backyard breeder, a hobby breeder. Because some people are like, well, a backyard breeder can be a reputable breeder and a hobby breeder. Like maybe at some point in time, people just called it backyard breeding, but then it took on a negative connotation. I honestly don't know. So can you kind of, from your perspective, explain the difference between the three terms?
Yeah, sure. And I think in a way, they're a little bit made up. But my perception of a backyard breeder is this. When you are breeding and raising a litter of puppies in your home, what happens is that when they start becoming weaning age, they get very messy because the mothers no longer clean up after them. And so a person who has never raised a litter of puppies before and doesn't really know what to expect doesn't have an area prepared for that. They don't have it all set up the way they should. And so what they end up doing is they end up putting those puppies into the backyard so that they can pee and poop outside instead of in their homes. And I think that's how the term originated, was because somebody who's not done this before, and maybe it was an accident, or it's just something they wanted to try, or maybe they wanted to put food on the table, for their family, and they wanted to raise a litter of puppies and hopefully make some money or whatever. If they're not prepared for it, they don't have the facilities for it, then those puppies end up typically being put out into the backyard. And that just helps keep things clean, but it also can have a pretty negative effect on puppies that have very fragile immune systems. So I think that's how that term came to be. And the other two terms, I've heard the term professional breeder. I've heard the term hobby breeder. I am a high-end show and performance dog breeder, so I breed dogs for purpose. Most of the dogs that come out of my nursery do go to families who are not showing their dogs. They're not really planning to do titles on them. They just want a nice family pet, and they want a dog that's beautiful. But I do breed to those standards. And so I'm considered a high-end ethical breeder because I follow a code of ethics. And that code of ethics is published by my breed club, the parent club for boxers and the parent club for Boston Terriers. There's a parent club for every breed, and they all have a code of ethics. And there is an additional code of ethics for natural rearing that lies on top of it and sometimes is at odds with the code of ethics that the parent clubs put out. And I'm happy to talk about those, but it's things like vaccinating and spaying young and things like that. But as far as a hobby breeder, I think that term came about because no one wants to be called a professional breeder. There's a lot of hostility out there that has to do with dog breeders, and some of it's justified, and a lot of it is not. So I think breeders are just afraid of being called professional. And when I was being mentored, I was told, you're not supposed to make any money doing this. You're just supposed to spend money doing it. And that never sat real well with me because I have 4 freezers full of human grade meat here that I feed to my dogs, and it's very expensive to do. So it's okay for somebody who is a quote professional breeder or quote hobby breeder to have money flowing. And I think that there's just some difficulty that breeders have with all those different terms. And I don't know what to call myself. Honestly, I'm just a high-end ethical breeder.
I like that. So my weekend.
Please.
So we have like a kickoff to the holiday season, the 1st of December, and my girlfriends and I went to the city to wander around and have a blast. And we came across, and it was so strange because they were there, but we didn't notice them at first. And we're all dog lovers. And we turned, and there's puppies everywhere in this little section. It's cold. So that's the first thing, is like, why are these puppies out here in the cold? And two, and everyone's like, they're in like a little fenced off area where they can play, and people are going in and out of the fenced off area, picking up the puppies, handling the puppies, doing all these. And at first I thought it was like some type of veterinarian thing, like people were bringing their puppies in for like maybe low cost vaccines or something. But when I actually read the little tent or teepee sign, I realized, oh, this is a breeder and these are doodles. And so I'm sitting here and I'm so confused because I misunderstood everything that was going on, and sadly just started talking. And because they were like, hey, do you want to hold a puppy? And I'm like, should I be holding a puppy? How old are these puppies? Are these puppies safe for just random people to be holding? And do you honestly, I'm a stranger. I shouldn't be walking in there. You don't know where I'm coming from or what my dogs might have that I mean, it just starts coming out. And eventually I just silence myself and just go, okay, well, bye. And just turn around and walk away. And my friends were laughing because we're all in the rescue world, and you've learned all of these things, like, at a certain age. They weren't like 6-week-old puppies. I couldn't tell you how old they were, but it was strange to me to see puppies just out and about with strangers handling them. And although it looked pretty, it was better than someone who has, the back of a truck and a bunch of puppies in the back of a truck on a side of the road type of thing. But it was still kind of like unnerving. So what are your thoughts on situations like that? Because in my perspective, someone like you, I can't imagine setting up on a sidewalk somewhere with all of your puppies and just letting strangers handle your puppies.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't do that. However, people are people, Kimberly, and there's all kind of people in the world. And as a high-end show breeder, I was mentored into a world that is very judgmental of people who do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, as a human being and a member of the human race, and also the owner of a business called the Dog Breeder Store, I have a great deal of compassion for anybody who is on a journey. And this is probably the beginning of a journey for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And they're making mistakes. And my heart goes out to those puppies. It goes out to the people, because maybe they're bad people. I don't know. Maybe
they seem perfectly friendly and nice.
Maybe they're just, because I own the Dog Breeder Store, I take phone calls on a regular daily basis from people who are everything from the Amish, who have a very bad reputation for being high volume breeders, to people like me and everything in between. And I'm even starting to see the Amish wanting to learn about doing things ethically and doing, because they grew up thinking this was the way you breed dogs, in these volume buildings on grates. And they didn't realize that there was something wrong with that, because they think of them as livestock.
Mm.
And so as I have opened my heart to the breeding world in general and realized that we are all on some kind of a journey, I always feel like I want to just ask questions that are non-judgmental and get people thinking. because it's real easy to offend somebody and get them defensive where they just they shut down.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to be that person. I want to be the person who offers to mentor and who helps these folks get their puppies raised properly in a good environment, doing puppy culture, doing early development work, feeding them a raw diet, learning about how to boost their immune systems, getting them into loving homes. And that's not really possible doing that on the side of a road. My puppies are all pretty much sold before they're born or soon thereafter because people are buying me as a breeder rather than buying a puppy on a lark. And I think the worst time in the world to buy a puppy is during the holidays. So, for those people, it may be a commodity. And they're just hoping that they can sort of get rid of all those puppies before Christmas time, and that puppy will be in somebody's stocking. But those are the ones that end up in the shelters. Mm-hmm. And that's not what we want for any dog.
Yeah.
So you did the right thing. I think going and, spewing at them a little bit is probably fine.
I promise I was nice. I was just so confused because it took a second for me to realize that they were breeders because I thought they were veterinarians and I didn't understand why the puppies were outside. And then it was just like, and once I realized they were breeders, I was like, okay, I'm going to shut up and keep walking.
Well, you may be too young for this, both of you, but they used to sell puppies in pet stores. Mm-hmm. When you went to PetSmart, that's what they were selling. And now they have adoption fairs outside, or they have them in the store because it's become very well understood that those puppies that are coming through those kind of marketplaces are usually coming from very poorly bred, high volume breeders who don't know what they're doing. Mm-hmm. So at least there's been a shift in that respect. And my hope is that we can keep educating people so that they're either rescuing and doing the things that they need to do responsibly with those rescues, or that they're buying from a breeder and they're asking all the right questions. I blog a lot and I shoot a lot of videos and I teach a lot. And I just wrote a document called All the Questions to Ask Your Breeder. And it's hard hitting. It really is. You should be asking your breeders some very important questions if you're thinking about buying a dog.
I was thinking about the code of ethics that you mentioned, and specifically, when I think of boxers, for instance, I think of like tons of health issues, right? Like I'm thinking of like heart defects. I have a friend that their boxer died at like 5 years old from a heart defect. And I think of all these different genetic conditions. And so I'm curious, where are things going wrong in this code of ethics with breeding, specifically with boxers and with any of the dog breeds that we like automatically think of like specific health conditions?
Well, that's really the $1 million question. When one is breeding a purebred animal of any kind, it doesn't matter if it's a cat or a dog or a sheep or a cow or whatever, in order to make them look like they do, there is a certain amount of inbreeding that occurs. There's a fine line between establishing a breed standard with dogs that all look alike and then closing the stud book on that, meaning you can't introduce any additional animals into that breeding pool, and then doing that too much. Breeding brothers to sisters or granddaughters to grandfathers and things like that. And there's something in the breeding world called coefficient of inbreeding. And the wonderful thing about that term is that it is something we can test for genetically. So if you, as a human being, could have your blood drawn, or you could have a cheek swab done, that's what we do with the dogs, and you could have a gene test done that tells you how inbred you are. And to a certain extent, you and I are all inbred because we are, we look the way we do. We have certain eye color, certain hair color, and maybe we live in a population where there was selection for those characteristics. And the same is true with purebred dogs. And so the code of ethics that the parent clubs put out for us includes health screening for those things. And for example, in boxers, our two major causes of early death in boxers are heart problems and cancer. Cancer is 80% environmentally influenced. It's only 20% genetically influenced. And I learned that through the longevity science that Rodney Habib and Karen Becker put out. But I thought it was 90-10, but it's 80-20 with dogs. But the heart issues are kind of in the same arena. We know that they're triggered by environmental toxins, but we also know that they have a genetic predisposition for them. So any ethical breeder is going to be putting a cardiac Holter monitor on their breeding dogs every single year from the time they're youngsters until they die. And that's what I do. I own my own high-end digital haltering system, and I rent it out to people very inexpensively when I'm not using it, because I want other people to do the same thing. And these are very expensive tests to run, but you can weed out a lot of these genetic problems if you do the proper screening for them. But the cool thing about what you ladies are teaching out there, and what I'm trying to get out to the breeders, is that we can affect things in such a positive way when we feed a raw diet, and when we avoid toxins, and when we understand that there are alternatives to vaccines that are better for the dogs and still create great immunity. And we can prevent the triggering of some of these genetically predisposed conditions. It's not 100%. I mean, genetics are complicated, and we really don't, we don't know everything we need to know about it. But an ethical breeder is going to be following all of those, edicts that are in the code of ethics that their parent club puts out. And we have a chart of health screens that we are required to do to carry the Breeder of Merit certificate on our website. And my suggestion to anyone who's going to buy a dog is ask to see those, because I have people that steal mine all the time, or they grab a screenshot of my Breeder of Merit certificate and they put it on their website, because there are people who are just, not honest.
Oh,
wow. So I always suggest that you know everything you need to know, and don't necessarily trust people to, don't necessarily think that they're always telling you the truth.
Mm-hmm. Trust but verify.
I like that. Trust but verify. I like that a lot.
So do you have like a full body cringe when you see a breed becoming popularized by media?
Yeah, like French bulldogs right now.
Oh my God, yes. The blue ones, the fluffy ones, yeah,
the Merle.
all of that. Yeah, it happened with the Dalmatians when Disney's movie came out way back. Yeah. And Dalmatian popularity went through the roof. And so we had people that were breeding them for money, and they weren't following those codes of ethics. The breeders who have been in this a long time, or that really care, it shows. They're not breeding very often. They're breeding with a purpose. They can show you all their health screens. They know these animals inside and out. These dogs live in their homes. They're not living in kennels. And when a breed becomes very popular like that, they tend to get overbred. And yeah, I breed to the standard. And the French Bulldog standard does not ask for a dog with a fluffy merle blue coat. Those are disqualifications for that breed. So, I don't judge it, because people are doing what they do for whatever reason they do it. And I always feel like it's my job to be a good mentor, mm-hmm. and to help people save their puppies. That's my number one goal in life, is to help people save puppies, because a lot of the breeders who are brand new at this don't know how to keep puppies alive. Mm. They're very fragile when they're first born.
I've heard of something called fading puppy syndrome. Is that what you're referring to, or is there other issues too?
Yeah, that's just a general term. It's not a medical diagnosis, but it is a set of symptoms, and it's unfortunately very common, and it happens in humans as well. I think it's called it might be called sudden infant death or something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. In humans, although maybe that's not the right term in humans, because in puppies, it's a fade. The puppies start to lose turgor. They stop eating. They get cool. They lose body temperature. They lose hydration. And if you don't get on top of that immediately and get them in an ICU and get them hydrated and get their glucose levels up and get their energy dealt with, they do die.
Mm-hmm.
And we lose about 30% of puppies to fading puppy syndrome. But when you think about it in nature, and you're not in a confined environment in somebody's home, that's really what happens. It's kind of survival of the fittest. And the reason that dogs give birth to multiple offspring is because they lose some.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that are not as thrifty don't make it, and they don't end up reproducing. So it makes the species stronger. But, as far as, for you and me, it tugs at our hearts, and we don't want these babies dying. So I actually invented a fading puppy remedy that's entirely homeopathic, and we've saved thousands of puppies with it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a very popular product, and it addresses the energetics behind fading puppy syndrome. So I teach about this. I teach workshops on it. But it's a real thing, and it's I always like you said, cringe when I get those phone calls for the dog breeder store when somebody calls me and they say, I woke up this morning and 3 of my puppies were dead. And that's a hard lesson to learn when you're breeding either just once or if you're breeding more than once, because you learn that you have to stay up with them.
Mm-hmm.
And those of us who are high-end ethical breeders don't sleep much. We have all these memes that float around where we just look like zombies, because we don't get any sleep for the first week. Seriously, don't get sleep for the first week. So, yeah, it's a real thing.
I have a cross-bred dog that I suspect that when Game of Thrones was popular and everybody wanted a husky, and huskies were ending up in the shelters because people didn't really understand what it was to have a husky, a few breeders thought it would be cool to breed a husky with a golden retriever to kind of tone down the husky and make it more of a family dog. And so that's what I have. I think they call it I do know they're called a Goberian, and his name is Apollo. He's going to be 6 years old next month, and he is the best dog ever. However, when I first brought him home, he was actually my stepson's dog. My stepson called me or texted me one day and said, if you were to get a puppy today, what type of food would you feed it? And I texted him back, you know exactly what I would feed a puppy. Why do you ask? Randomly out of the blue. And so I realized he was standing in front of puppies because I asked him, and I said, okay, well, I don't think you should get a puppy, but if you do get a puppy, just promise that if you change your mind at any point in time, you call me. Don't take it to a shelter. Don't give it away. And so probably 6 months later, we got a call at 10:30 at night, and Johan was flying down to Arizona to pick up a puppy. So he's been with us ever since. One of the biggest questions that I got from people when I brought this puppy home was, is he more husky or is he more golden? And I would tell people he's both. And no one ever believes me, but I tell people it is like having 2 dogs. He is husky and he is golden. And it's just like, he's mostly husky. I mean, physically, he has the look of a husky, like he has the coloring, but even his coat is more golden retriever. His head is boxy like a golden retriever. And so it's just sort of like, but his personality is both breeds. So I was wondering if you could kind of explain for people who are looking at these cross breeds out there,
like a doodle.
Yeah, the DNA doesn't work that way. Like you don't just mix 2 breeds together Like you don't mix I don't know, I can't think of another mellow dog except for a golden retriever. And even golden retrievers aren't always mellow, but you don't mix a golden with, like, for instance, a Malinois or a Dutch Shepherd and then end up with this goofy, fun, loving house pet.
Yeah. Okay. So, okay. So I'm not sure where you're going with the question. So let me just comment here. Somebody like me who breeds a purebred is producing something that's relatively predictable.
Mm-hmm.
So, what comes out of my nursery looks like a boxer. They act like a boxer for the most part. They have a fun sense of humor. They're great working dogs. They will make you laugh in a hot second. If they figure out that something they just did makes you laugh, they will do it 100 times. They're notorious for these zoomies that they get. And so that is kind of what is predictable when you have a purebred. But you got to also realize that somewhere along the line, a long way back, somebody crossed a this with a that with an other, and they eventually got a boxer. They got something that was an early version of a boxer. Mm-hmm. And they were working dogs. They were bull baiting dogs. They were mastiff type dogs. And I've seen pictures of the early boxers before they were actually recognized by the American Kennel Club or by any kennel club. And they're kind of like what you're describing, right?
Yeah.
They're a cross of a cross, and people were trying to get something. And so eventually they end up looking like a specific thing, and the person or persons who were trying to produce a certain set of characteristics were successful. And then what happens is they apply for breed recognition with their breed club, which in the United States is the American Kennel Club. There's other kennel clubs in other countries that recognize breeds. And I think we've got maybe 250 breeds or so, something like that in the United States. So they started somewhere. And they started culling out maybe the ones that had, curly hair, or the ones that didn't have the heads they wanted or whatever. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't mean they killed them. That just means they didn't breed them.
Okay.
They just bred the ones they wanted to breed. And I have a friend who is a high-end breeder who was trying to breed boxers that didn't have to have their tail stocked. So he was breeding very high-end show boxers with corgis. And he was getting boxers that had the nubby tail, and then of course they look like they had little short legs and so forth. But he eventually bred back another, more boxers into that program to where they look like boxers again, and they had the little nubby tail. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how the process works. And I think that there's a lot of judgment about the doodle breeders, and I will admit that I have been a part of that for a while. I just didn't understand it. I felt like, well, why are you just throwing these two breeds together when you don't have a specific purpose for it? Are you just doing it to make money or whatever? And you're not health testing these dogs. But I've been teaching a lot in the breeding community, and I taught at the Big Hearted Breeder Summit. I keynoted for them a couple of months ago, and there were a number of, I'll just call them oodle breeders there, because a doodle is not a breed. And there were people who were 19 generations down into this.
Oh, wow.
With very specific purposes in mind. They were breeding for specific characteristics. They were health testing both sides of the pedigree intensely. So if they were breeding let's say a golden retriever with a poodle, they were doing all the health testing required by the parent club for both breeds. And then they were health testing the puppies as well before they decided what to go into the next generation. They might only choose one puppy to go into the next generation. So I developed quite a respect for people who are on the forefront of trying to create a new breed like that. And they are working with the AKC to actually get breed recognition. And they're not going to be called doodles, I can tell you that. they'll be called something.
Mm-hmm.
They may be named after their founder. So there's just all kinds of people out there. There's all kinds of reasons that people decide to throw two dogs together. And sometimes it's an accident and sometimes they're experimenting. But if they're not doing it with purpose in mind and with an understanding of the health problems that come into the program from both sides of the pedigree, then in my mind, they're not doing it responsibly.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's pretty safe to say if you just see a sign on a pole in your neighborhood for puppies for sale, like they're probably not like health testing anything, right? Like, I feel like that's a pretty good screener.
It may be, but I always would say, I mean, heck, if you're interested, go and ask the questions, but don't just fall in love with a puppy. I have friends that will go see a litter and they pick up the most unthrifty puppy and they'll take it home with them because they feel sorry for it. And all they're doing is putting money in the pockets of somebody who's doing something unethically, and they're encouraging them to do it again. And please don't give your money to these people. I hate the thought of their puppies ending up in a shelter. I do. But that's not where your money should be. That's not where your vote should be going.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. And you should be asking all those questions.
Can you share some of the questions we can ask?
Yeah, number one, I would ask, are you doing all the health screening required by your parent breed club? And do you belong to that club? Do you adhere to their code of ethics? And if they just say, I hear this a lot. Well, heart problems don't run in my line. And I just go, I'm calling you on that because it runs in the breed. I'm sorry, if you're not testing for it, you don't know. So, I call BS on that. So I would ask that. I would also ask if they are doing early neurological stimulation or any kind of early development work with the puppies, because puppies are a lot of work.
Is that the puppy culture?
Yeah, puppy culture is one of the best programs for it. It's not the only one. But I start when the puppies are 3 days of age, and I start doing early neurological stimulation with them. It's a biosensor program. And you're just starting to expose them to things that they wouldn't normally be exposed to, but in a very gentle way, in a very quick. And then when we move into puppy culture, we're exposing them to sights and sounds and things that smells that they wouldn't, normally get exposed to. We're trying to create a bomb-proof puppy. Mm-hmm. And for example, I have a sound loop that is available on the Dog Breeder channel for free on YouTube. And it's a set of brief sounds that normally might scare a dog. There are fireworks and gunshots and doorbells ringing and dogs barking and fights and airplanes crashing and flags flapping and things like that. And we start running that sound loop when they're really young, when their ears are first opening at a very low decibel level. So it just becomes background noise for them. And that way, when they encounter it, we play it while they're eating, while they're playing, while they're having fun. So that kind of a program usually also includes early training. So hopefully, a question you would ask a breeder is, are you teaching them clicker training? Are you teaching them manding? Do they understand that when you ask them to sit, you want them to sit and you're going to reward them for it, or to recall, or to lie down? Because a puppy coming out of a nursery at 8 weeks should know all that stuff. And they should have been exposed to a crate. Mm-hmm. And because they're such hard work, people that are kind of new at this, they get overwhelmed, and they're lucky if they can just keep them clean. We have to have a potty area set up for them, and we need to be potty training them and things like that. So those are good questions to ask. In my world, I also want them asking questions about, are they using pharmaceuticals? Are they vaccinating? If so, on what kind of a schedule, and what What is driving their decisions to vaccinate, for example? And this is a huge issue in the breeding world. I'm assuming, I'll ask you both, did your dogs come to you vaccinated?
Oh, of course. I mean, they get lit up in shelters,
Yeah.
with everything. But I was gonna ask you about that because I think is it WASAVA, the World Association, recently changed their standard on whether puppies should be exposed to things before being fully vaccinated, because that's always kind of been a debate of how do you take them out in the world and expose them to new experiences versus being concerned about that period of waning immunity and the fully vaccinated thing.
Well, yeah, and I will say when I first was breeding, the first probably 30 years, man, we were wearing hazmat suits. We did not let anybody in our nursery until the puppies were 5 or 6 weeks old. If they came, they had to have, they had to be fully disinfected. They couldn't have on clothes that had touched another dog. They couldn't have shoes on. They had to step in bleach. I mean, it was crazy, over the top, fear-based protection. And I've let go of all that. That is the most ridiculous way to raise a litter of puppies, in my personal opinion, because they don't get the exposure to novel situations like they should. If you come into my nursery, which you are invited to do, I'll probably give you a clown wig to wear, or a black hat, or you'll be carrying an umbrella or a suitcase or something, because I want these puppies exposed to everything, and I want them exposed to bacteria. I want them exposed to the things that are going to prime their little baby immune systems to make them stronger without making them sick. And there's great ways to do that now. We don't really have to do the hazmat thing anymore, and we don't necessarily have to inject them. I have not vaccinated for many, many, many generations now. And part of the natural rearing code of ethics, I run the Natural Rearing Breeder Connection, by the way. We have a code of ethics that our breeders can adhere to. But part of that is we only vaccinate as required by law. And you probably know that the only vaccination required by law is rabies.
Yeah.
Everything else is optional. And every one of my puppies has measurable antibody titers to puppy diseases, and they've never been vaccinated. So that is a question that, back to your, Kimberly, your question about what would you ask your breeder? I think this is whether you're pro-vaccine or you are on the fence about it or whatever, or you don't want to do it at all, I think that understanding why it is that they're vaccinating, what they're vaccinating with, and at what point they're vaccinating is critical, because puppies carry maternal antibodies in their bloodstream. They're temporary. They wear off after a while. And if I got a chance to study a little bit with Dr. Ron Schultz, who was the head of canine immunology at the University of Wisconsin. I see you shaking your head. He ran the Rabies Challenge Fund.
Yeah.
And he keynoted at the Young Living Animal Conference where I was teaching. And so we got to go off and spend the afternoon with him. And I learned a lot. He's pro-vaccine, but with cautions. And one of the things I learned is that we very often are vaccinating these puppies while they are still carrying maternal antibodies in their bloodstream. Therefore, number one, the vaccine doesn't work. Number two, we're injecting heavy metals and foreign animal proteins into a puppy for no reason. And they then have to deal with that toxic load. So if they are still carrying protective maternal antibodies on board, there's no reason to vaccinate them. And the question then becomes, how do you know when that happens? When do those maternal antibodies go away? Well, they go away on a bell curve. They don't just drop overnight. But the University of Wisconsin has, where he used to be the chair, he's retired now, but they will run something called a nomograph. Are you familiar with that? Have you heard of that, Kimberly? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a titer for a dog, but it's for a pregnant dog. And they'll draw blood on them, and they can run a nomograph, and we literally get a report back that tells us precisely, almost to the day, when the maternal antibodies are going to drop low enough that they're not protective anymore. Therefore, they won't block the formation of permanent antibodies either through natural means or by vaccinating. And when they were testing these, or running these nomographs, they're finding that a lot of these puppies are still carrying maternal antibodies at 18 weeks of age.
Oh, wow.
So why are we vaccinating 6-week-old puppies, 9-week-old puppies, 12-week-old puppies? That's because we're trying to guess. We're throwing darts at a dartboard, and we're missing because we're trying to catch that bell curve without really knowing what the dots are on it. So I think that's a very important question to ask any breeder, or honestly any rescue person who's raising a litter. I work a lot with rescue people who are raising litters that are born, conceived in the wild.
Yeah.
And so I'm mentoring them to get them to understand that they don't necessarily want to be running to Tractor Supply and buying a 13-in-1 vaccine and giving it to a 6-week-old puppy, because that rescue is going to be damaged at that point.
Yeah.
And then they have to recover from that. And recovery is very difficult. So, I didn't know if we were going to get into the vaccine thing, but as you can tell, I'm very well educated on it.
Yeah. I think a lot of our listeners will be really interested in that as well.
I hope so. And my goal in my role in life is to help those people who are there at the beginning of life, because we breeders have this period between conception and birth. That's 9 weeks, where we can choose to feed raw food, or we can choose to feed crap in a bag kibble. That's what all of it is, as far as I'm concerned. And we can feed as Mother Nature feeds, and we can use things other than pharmaceuticals. And then we are also there at birth. We can choose to support these puppies without big pharma, without big ag, without big chem, without big kibble. And we can, in that first 8-week period before those puppies leave the nursery, we can do so much good. And we can put puppies out into the communities who are not damaged. And I think that any breeder that is doing this long term comes to realize that these things are epigenetically influenced. So we can actually influence future generations by what we do. And I always teach in my classes that what you do with a girl who is pregnant affects 3 generations, because it affects her, it affects the female puppies that are growing in her womb, and the eggs that female puppy is producing, because she's born with all of them in her body the day she's born. So if you've been doing things that support the mom and support her microbiome and support her dietary needs naturally, you've already affected 3 generations.
Yeah.
And I think it's profound. So, my goal here in being on the podcast with you guys is to try to reach as many breeders as possible and let them know that we're there to provide free education to them. I run the Natural Rearing Breeder Connection. And I mentioned early on that my mentor was Jeannie Thomason, Dr. Jeannie Thomason. She's an animal naturopath. And she wrote the book called Natural Rearing, and she ran the school I went to. Well, she passed away a couple of years ago. And a couple of us who went to her school revived it all. We brought that whole organization back to life. So we're out there providing free education to breeders and to pet parents who are looking for breeders who are doing things more naturally. And we're trying to help connect those people together.
That's amazing.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a noble cause.
I think so too.
And I'm getting to the point where I'm maybe getting too old to breed, but I can still teach. So what other questions do you have?
Yeah, you mentioned your dog that had the rabies reaction. Can you
Yes.
tell us a little bit of the story? Like, how did you know that something was going on? Did it manifest physically, behaviorally? Were you able to help them recover?
Oh, that's a great question. If you Google Ginger rabies, Ginger's her name, rabies, you'll find her article, her stories all over the internet. It's been in magazines, it's been all over. But when Ginger was a boxer who was an AKC grand champion, she was a credentialed service dog. She wasn't a fake service dog. she actually had spent 9 months with a trainer being trained in service. And so she was very polite, very well trained. She traveled on airplanes. She traveled on public transit. She loved children. She just knew a lot. And she was very grounded. And she received her third rabies vaccine, which ended up being her last one. And she almost overnight turned into Cujo. So the first thing I saw was behavioral. She started attacking children. She started attacking other dogs. It was unprovoked. I had just run her thyroid panel as part of the health screening requirements by the American Boxer Club. So I had a full panel run on her just before that. And I thought, well, maybe something's wrong with her thyroid. Because when their thyroid's off, they can have aberrant behavior. So I ran her thyroid again, and her thyroid numbers were off the charts bad. She was already in autoimmune thyroiditis. Her body was attacking her thyroid and destroying it. So her endocrine system was heavily disrupted. And she developed a nodule where the rabies shot was given. It looked like a marble. It was really hard. And I asked my vet about it, and my vet wanted to remove it. And my intuition said, maybe we shouldn't remove it. Maybe her body is doing something to protect herself. And I learned later that that was the case. But I started doing a lot of research because she got very sick. She started developing juvenile arthritis. She had to wear a muzzle. We thought we had a behavior problem. I did not connect all the dots right away. I just knew something was wrong, and I didn't understand it. I didn't understand that a dog can develop a mild, non-fatal case of rabies from the rabies vaccine. And that's what had happened to her. So if you take a look at all the list of symptoms of a rabid animal and you crank them down, that's rabies vaccinosis. And she developed pretty much everything on the list. So she started tearing her ACL. She was doing performance work, and so her ACL started to fray. I mean, she was just a hot mess. And we got to where we had to put blackout blinds on the front of our home because she almost went through the glass at children that were walking by. So we were running out of options, and we were afraid that she was going to meet her maker. And I finally found what I needed to find, which was that rabies vaccines can cause something called vaccinosis or adverse vaccine reactions. And she was the poster child for it. And I ended up giving her a remedy for it. It was homeopathic. And literally within 2 days, she came back to me. It was like she'd been in some kind of behavior jail. And she just took a deep breath and she went, "Hi, I'm back." It was the most beautiful thing to watch.
I bet.
Yeah. And now some of the damage that it had done, it took me a couple of years to figure this out, but some of the damage that had been done was permanent. But she repaired her own ACL. I switched her over to raw diet. That was how I started learning about this stuff. And I stopped vaccinating. And I started learning what pharmaceuticals can do to dogs. So I stopped using all of those. I started learning about homeopathy and herbs and essential oils and dietary interventions and went to school. And she ended up outliving every puppy that was in her litter by double.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
There were 10 puppies in the litter she was born into, and they were all dead by the time they were, the last one died around 6,
Wow.
which is, that just breaks my heart.
Yeah.
Now, had she not been vaccine damaged, who knows how long she would have lived. And I ran into a boxer last week who's about to have her 20th birthday.
Oh,
Wow.
wow.
So, yeah. And I'm trying to get an interview with the people who own her.
Yeah. I want to know that story.
Yeah. You'll see it when I interview them.
Yeah. I'm always fascinated by dogs that live a long life. I want to know everything about them.
Well, yeah. And following Rodney Habib and Karen Becker has been inspirational for me. I'm writing a book right now because Dr. Jeannie Thomason was in the middle of writing another book when she passed. And she unfortunately didn't give her credentials to her family. So we lost all of her work. And so I'm writing that book. And I'm dying to call it Breeding the Forever Dog. I'm a little worried about, if that's a copyright infringement, but I'm trying to get a hold of Rodney and Karen to make sure they're okay with that. But I truly believe that we can make a huge difference. And I have a friend who had a boxer that died at 19, and he just passed peacefully. I know it's possible. Yeah. So when we're celebrating these animals that live to be into double digits, I think we're not making the bar high enough. And, I don't want return business to my nursery because somebody's dog died at 4 or 6 or 8. I want return business because that dog was there when their children were born and it saw the children off to college and it died a peaceful death of old age. Mm-hmm. And that's what I want as a breeder. So, yeah. Do you interview people who have dogs that are long-lived?
We haven't yet.
Not yet.
But I'm open to it.
I know. We need to find some people. I was fortunate enough because when Bobi was in the news before he passed, I read all the articles. All the articles said the same thing. And I had specific questions. So it's sort of like there are all these general things of what he ate and what his day was like. But I had specific questions about the environment, what the area was like. Because I was trying to picture it and compare it to what my dog's lives are like here where we live. And someone introduced me to a veterinarian that knew the family. I reached out to her on Instagram and she was like, yeah, I'll talk to you. And so we set up a Zoom and we talked for probably a couple hours where I asked her every single, were there, cell towers in the area? Cause all the things that people say that impact, our pet's health, our dog, our health. And, when it comes to their diet, specifically, was it raw? Was it cooked? Was he fed out of a dish? Did he eat just on the ground? When he walked around, is that just something normal where he's just walking around and, everyone's like, oh yeah, there's so-and-so's dog, is that normal? What's the soil like? Is it very nutrient rich? And, I just had all these very specific questions that those articles, I don't think people who were writing about Bobi knew to even ask those questions. Whereas I think raw feeders, we've learned that, yes, I learned about how important it is for the soil to be enriched because when people talk about dogs that are fed a vegetarian diet and they always mention bramble and people talk about, well, that's not the rule, that's an exception because Bramble's owner was very experienced and basically a scientist and knew how to test the soil and how to enrich the soil so that the food that she was growing for her dog was very, very nutritious, whereas the average person isn't going to know any of that. We're just going to the store, buying some vegetables and going, here you go, you're a vegetarian now. And so it's just, it was, to me, is just fascinating. I want to know, it's how were they vaccinated? How often were they vaccinated? When were they spayed and neutered? Where did they sleep? Where, inside, outside, or, did they just go wherever they wanted to? And I ultimately just learned that he had a very casual life. I think he had a life that if I lived in a very small town where my dogs could just be loose without getting in trouble, that's sort of how where he was raised. And everything there was just, they have pollution, but it's not at the level as city pollution, and it was just, I think also just a very different, I don't want to say society, just kind of a different culture in how casual and stuff, because I think a lot of people before kibble became a thing, the dogs ate what the humans ate. And so where Bobi was raised at, it was kind of the same thing. It wasn't like we're going to raise a dog that lives until he's 30. That wasn't kind of their mindset. It's just that that's just what they do. And I think we interviewed the ladies of Cocoa Therapy, and they told us that where they came from, kibble was actually way more expensive than fresh food. So everyone just fed fresh food. But when they came to America, they were like super excited to feed kibble because it's like, oh my gosh. And that's when their dogs started getting sick, and they could not figure out why their dogs were getting sick. And they finally narrowed it down to the biggest difference was the diet. So they went back to feeding fresh food and their dogs got better. And so it's interesting to me just what our dogs are exposed to on a daily basis with the candles that we burn, like those Yankee candles, or the constantly putting, flea and tick treatments. Because I know people, like I live in Washington State. We are a heartworm negative state. But I know people who still have their dogs get heartworm treatments just in case. And it's just like, why? Would you go and take a measles vaccine every year just in case? And it's just like, but people do that. And it never occurs to them. We get into this roller coaster of a mindset of just doing one after the, without really taking time to think about if it makes sense. And I felt like that was the biggest difference between my life and the life where Bobi was, where it was just, we overthink things and end up doing a lot more damage, whereas it was just very casual.
That's what I love about you, Kimberly and Erin, because that's the science nerd in both of you. And my background's all science too. And I've had to just chill about a lot of that because I was taught, for example, that I should be giving antibiotics to a pregnant dog just in case, just to make sure that nothing, bad happened. Not realizing that it destroys her microbiome, and then the puppies inherit her microbiome when they're born. It sets them up for failure. And, you don't know what you don't know until you know it.
Yeah.
And I love that you're digging into all the science of it, but I have had to just let go of a lot of that stuff. And I remember handing my boxer, I was starting to feed raw rabbit. And I handed my boxer a half of a rabbit, fully intact rabbit. And she ran out into the yard and dug a big hole under a tree and buried it and covered it up with leaves. And I was horrified. I was thinking, oh my God, it's going to grow this and grow that. It's going to have maggots. And because she just left it there. So I call up my mentor and I told her about it. And she goes, just leave her alone. She knows what she's doing. And she was third generation naturally reared. So she's really kind of she's in the groove, right? And she went out the next day and she smelled it and she dug it up a little bit and she buried it again. And she did that for 3 days. And Dr. Thomason said to me, she's growing her own probiotics, Paula, leave her alone. And after the third or fourth day, I didn't turn anybody else out into that yard because I didn't want anybody digging her rabbit up. And I wanted to watch it. And she goes out, she digs the rabbit up, takes a big old smell of it and goes, it's ready. She lays down and eats the whole thing. And it was just the most beautiful thing to watch. Yeah. I didn't want to go pick it up and see how gross it was, but she didn't leave anything for me. And it's those moments when you realize that, yes, I would like to know how Bobi was raised and all those very specific things. I think they're really interesting. But in my world, if I overwhelm my clients with all the things they shoulda, coulda done, they'll just say to me, well, they're going to die of something anyway. I can't handle that. So I try to give them very small steps, things they can do that are easy.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I focus on a lot is how to support pregnant and nursing animals with homeopathics. I have spent a lot of time learning about homeopathics. I used to use a lot of essential oils, but they're biologically active. They're very effective. But there's a lot of things, even herbs, you got to be careful when they're pregnant. Not everything is safe when you've got a growing embryo or a neonate with a brand new immune system. So one of my favorite systems of medicine is homeopathy. And we have kits that we've produced for the dog breeder store that are for whelping. Whelp using or queen your cats using homeopathy because it's completely safe. And they need pain support just like we do. And they have uterine inertia sometimes, and homeopathics can help with all of that. So, so I don't use antibiotics prophylactically anymore. I haven't done that in a very long time. And I think that if someone looks at the code of ethics for natural rearing, it's all going to make sense to them. They're going to go, oh, yeah, why didn't I think of that? Feed a species-specific, fresh, whole food diet? Duh. The first time I heard about raw feeding, my brain went like yours. It was like, wait a second, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Why didn't I think of that? And I was measuring everything out on food scales and, 1.4 ounces of liver and all that stuff. And I went through the nutrition courses too and the formulators. And I went, nobody in this world can do this. It's not sustainable. So if you just rotate your protein sources and rotate your probiotics and rotate your essential fatty acids and rotate your vegetables and fruits or whatever you're going to do, it all works out.
Yeah. Yeah.
The main thing we have to do as breeders is give them some extra calcium. In the wild, they eat more organs and they eat more calcium. They eat more bones. So that's what we have to do for them that's different. It's not rocket science.
So,
right.
And with the code of ethics, I'm imagining, there's like the raw food diet. We talked about the not using antibiotics unnecessarily. I'm imagining no flea, tick, heartworm kind of treatments. Like, what are some other things that are, involved in being an official, like, natural rearing breeder?
That's a really good question because we actually credential our natural rearing breeders, and they get an emblem that they can put on their website that says they are credentialed and vetted. And we're hardcore about it. We don't just trust them. It took me 3 years to get my credentials with Dr. Thomason because I had something buried in my website that talked about Dr. Dodd's minimal vaccine protocol, and she found it. And she said, no. You're not a natural rearing breeder if that's what you're teaching people to do. So back to what the concepts are, and we have a list. You can go to the nrbreeder.com and you can look at our code of ethics. But it's basically no pharmaceuticals, using natural medicines, no flea and tick and heartworm medications, no insecticides, no pesticides. Nothing harmful in the environment. We want them to clean with natural cleaners, not greenwashed cleaners, not things that make their eyes burn. There's ways to prevent parvo without those. And a lot of breeders are scared. They don't want to lose puppies to parvo. And so I teach a lot of these workshops on how you prevent that without using toxic chemicals and pharmaceuticals. So our code of ethics says no insecticides, no pesticides, no harsh chemicals. Learn to read labels. You're feeding a species-specific whole food, fresh diet. You're only vaccinating as required by law. You're doing early development work with your puppies. You belong to a breed club and you proof your dogs in the environments that breed is meant to be proofed in. So if they're working dogs or they're sporting dogs or whatever, that they're engaged and proofed in those things. That, let's see, what else? I can't remember. That's the main stuff. It's basically doing no harm. But, you got to understand that every once in a while, one of us has to have a C-section. So those dogs have to go through surgery. And there are ways to take a dog through surgery and give them proper pain support and proper, like I use a homeopathic called WAR, WAR. It's a homeopathic antibiotic. And I don't have to use antibiotics. I don't have to use Rimadyl. I don't have to use Tramadol. And I've put myself through it. I don't do stuff to my dogs that I'm not going to be willing to try on myself. I put myself through medical procedures using just that stuff, and I'm a pain weenie. I don't like being in pain, and they work.
Wow.
They work. Yeah.
That's hardcore. So I admire that.
It's very cool. We have these remedies that are called Narayani remedies. They're homeopathic remedies that I brought over from the United Kingdom, and I'm pushing them very hard in the breeding community because they're incredibly effective for gastric problems, for aspiration pneumonia, for pain support, for ligament support, for parasite control. There's all kinds of ways to keep parasites down without using systemic insecticides on your dog.
Well, I was curious. So in my volunteer work, we provide free vet care, essentially to like owned pets living in poverty-stricken neighborhoods, essentially, people who aren't otherwise going to a veterinarian. And so one of the things that they always do is dewormer for the puppies. And so I was curious, is there a natural form of deworming? Do puppies raised that way not need to be dewormed? How does that work?
Oh, that's a really good question. So a puppy with a strong immune system may have a low load of parasites. I live in Texas, and our soil is wet here a lot. So we have hookworm in the soil. It's zoonotic. I don't walk around barefoot much, but I have a microscope. You spend $110 on a microscope and run your own fecals. So know if your puppies have parasites before you worm them. Don't just put an insecticide in their system without knowing that they have an overload of the parasite, they can't handle it themselves, and they're highly symptomatic. Because all of us have parasites, all of us. And if we have a low load, we're not even aware of it. So I can tell you that naturally reared puppies don't get symptoms. I might see hookworm eggs on my slides, but they're usually countable. There's so few that I can count them with my eyes. They're not overloaded, and they don't have symptoms. And yes, I can give them, there's a huge variety in the natural world of solutions to assist them in bringing that population down to either nothing or to a manageable level where it just doesn't matter. There's essential oils that work. There's diatomaceous earth. I feed that in their gruel and in their raw food from the time they're young. There's homeopathics that work really well. There's herbs. I'm not a huge herb user just because herbs are more biologically active and you have to give them orally, and I'm just not that well trained in them. So I tend to gravitate towards homeopathics and diatomaceous earth and essential oil use. And they work great. Homeopathics are the bomb, I'm telling you. And just knowing what you're dealing with is important because, yeah, your vet may just go ahead and give them Pyrantel Pamawate or something like that. I've seen puppies die from it. It's not innocuous. It's not benign. It's a systemic poison. And you give it to a baby, and sometimes it kills them. Sometimes it makes them very sick. So are you trying to poison the host, or are you trying to poison the parasite? And if so, what exactly is that parasite? Just like you were saying, Kimberly, you wanted to know every specific thing about Bobi. It just churns my stomach when people are giving systemic poisons to little bitty babies without even knowing why they're doing it. And I get on my soapbox about it because I see all the damage it does. And I see how well Mother Nature provides. And I can tell you that a raw-fed dog, they don't have very many things that get triggered. Raw feeding is the foundation to that pyramid of health. And when I switched over to raw feeding, my dogs stopped having to go to the vet, except for, routine health screens, because I do a lot of health screens as a breeder. But, we don't have cardiomyopathy. We don't have genetic diseases, knock on wood. I'm not saying it won't ever happen, but I think that health screening for breeders is great. It's important. It's imperative. But natural rearing, you add natural rearing onto that and raw feeding, and man, you've got some really healthy dogs, and people want them.
Yeah.
They don't want to be adopting puppies out of a nursery that immediately have to go to the vet because they're sick. And it happens a lot. And I'm just trying to stop it.
I do know a natural rearing breeder for Great Danes down in Oregon. And she was one where she never had to promote her puppies because there were people lined up for future litters. And when she finally retired, people were like heartbroken because it was just sort of like she was such a great breeder.
Well, I hope she mentored people because what she was doing was very important. And I'm hoping that people that listen to this podcast will go to our website. It's nrbreeder.com, naturalrearingbreeder.com. We have a Facebook group, Natural Rearing Breeder Connection, and we will help you. And you can find vetted breeders there who are doing what your Great Dane breeder was doing. Mm-hmm. And we don't vet people and credential them just because they're raw feeding. Because thankfully, a lot of breeders do raw feed now. And I'm very, very proud of those people who do it. But I want to push them to do more. Mm-hmm. I want to push them to get the toxins out of their nurseries, out of their breeding programs, and produce puppies that are like your Great Dane breeder. I mean, my puppies are all sold before they're born, and people will pay for them.
Yeah.
They're not expecting to pay $500 for a dog that's been eating raw food for generations. My dogs all eat human grade raw food. So it's all stuff I could cook up on my grill.
So when people get a dog from you, do you have like an agreement that they have to sign? Like, do they have to agree to keep doing raw feeding and avoid pesticides or spay neuter or things like that?
Yeah, they do. But I can just tell you from experience that people will sign anything to get a puppy. They'll do anything to take that puppy home. And whether or not they're actually going to follow through is completely up to them, between them and God. And I'm not one to sue people. I feel like my job is to have them look at that contract. I have them look at it way before they ever come visit the nursery because I don't want them distracted by a beautiful little puppy that's licking them. I want them to read it. And I give them an incentive to keep going. I give them a better health guarantee if they keep the natural rearing up. But if they don't, sometimes tragedy happens. And I see it a lot. I had a client who bought a multi-generation naturally reared boxer from me. And he, after 3 years, he took the dog into his vet for something. And the vet talked him into a rabies shot. And the dog died on the table. Now, you don't see that very often. But he had a heart attack and died. Now, why he died, I don't know. But it was while he was there for that vet visit. And the guy was completely heartbroken. And he called me up and he said, I should have done what you said. And he said, you probably would never sell me another dog. And I said, you know what? I would sell you another dog in a heartbeat because you now know better. You would maybe be cautious about that next time. So those contracts are only worth what people will do after they sign them. And I give them a care booklet that's pretty detailed. It's got lots of links in it. I give it to them way in advance so they can do some studying. I make sure that they buy a couple of books, natural rearing and a raw feeding book, maybe Kimberly's book, and, get them to read those. I also love to have them read Natural Immunity by Pat McKay. It's an older book, but man, it really makes it very simple. It helps you understand how to make a dog immune without anything from Big Pharma. So ladies, I know we've gone way over. And
I know, but this was
tired
so
and your dogs need to eat.
Yeah,
Thank
this has
you
been
so much.
fascinating. Yes, I'll make sure we have links to the sites you mentioned in our show notes. You were just a wealth of information, and I definitely encourage people to reach out to you. And even people in the rescue world that are getting the pregnant mamas and having the litters, that's really great to know that you can be a resource for that too.
We would love to help them. I mean, we'll help anybody. I don't care if somebody has a Chihuahua, Dane, Doodle, Boodle, Woodle. It doesn't matter to me. I still want to help. And, if mentors don't mentor, we lose that information. So, and thank you both for what you're doing for the raw feeding community. I just want to make a difference in those first 8 weeks and make sure that the dogs that come into your home the next time come in with great microbiomes and aren't damaged.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Invite me back. All right.
Bye.
You ladies have a good evening. Thank you.
Thanks.